Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and this is Taking Care of Business. Joining me today is Duane Bratt, who is a political science professor at Mount Royal University in Calgary. Thanks for joining us again, Duane.
You're welcome, Mario.
Let's talk about the UCP, United Conservative Party, their annual general meeting happening this weekend here in Calgary. What's so united about this party right now?
Not very much. So typically a governing party's AGM is team building. It's socialization. It's a way for people from all different parts of the province, the MLAs, the constituency associations, volunteers, donors, all to come together. There are hospitality suites, there are parties. There's also, policy proposals that allow the grassroots to have some sort of impact on the government. That's all going to occur with this one, but there is a veil of tension, a very high tension going into this. So on Monday, a group of constituency association presidents signed a letter to the UCP party executive saying that they had reached the threshold of 1/4 of all constituency associations to move the leadership review of Jason Kenney, which had been scheduled for April, into December, January, or February, to move it up. In that same letter, they also wanted an independent audit of the leadership review vote, which basically says they didn't trust the party to run its own elections, in so many words. Now, there is also a motion on the table on Saturday to raise the threshold from 1/4 of constituency associations to 1/3. So there's going to be a floor battle about what takes precedence. Is it the letter that was based on 1/4, or is it this motion, which if passed would move it to 1/3? So that's going to be one form of tension. The other is that Peter Guthrie, UCP MLA from Airdrie, put out a public letter, and he read it to caucus, accusing Jason Kenney of violating election financing rules and being unethical by essentially trying to pack the AGM with Kenney supporters and having third parties pay for their fees, whether those were the registration fees of $350 or whether that was covering hotels and transportation. And Kenney has denied all of that, but he has said it's common for parties to subsidize students, for example. But I don't think this is about a whole bunch of 16-year-olds rolling into town. I think it's about stage managing the convention. There's other evidence of it being stage managed as well. So I mentioned the motion to raise the threshold for a leadership review. That motion is coming from a constituency association president in Edmonton, who also happens to be the communications director of the UCP. So he works for Jason Kenney. That is a conflict. There's also suggestions that they gave written instructions to move some of the ballot questions lower on the docket, so they might not have time to cover those. Right. And this was put in writing to UCP staffers, and it included things like replacing the federal carbon tax with a provincial carbon tax, or restoring 911 service, or banning coal mining on the eastern slopes, all things that the Kenney government has some issues with, but the grassroots want to vote on. We're also seeing that they're being given instructions on how to disrupt the convention. So if you start to see an anti-Kenney delegate start to go to the mic, you're to jump up and jump in front of them so that there may not be time for them to get to the microphone. So what happens if Todd Loewen or Drew Barnes show up? They have been kicked out of caucus, but have they been kicked out of the party? What if Brian Jean, who is running, the former Wild Rose leader, who is running for the UCP nomination for an open seat in Fort McMurray, on a mandate of forcing Kenney to resign. What if he shows up at the convention? So there's lots of drama that is potentially occurring here.
Well, we all know that Jason Kenney's popularity has plummeted in the past 2 years. Is it something that he can recover from?
So there's two ways of looking at that. It's within the party and outside of the party. I think within the party, I think he is capable of managing this convention or even winning a leadership review. Now, it wouldn't be a huge majority, but he would get over 50%. At least that's a possibility, because of the fear of Rachel Notley and the fear of the NDP and the argument that they have to keep united, because if they splinter, that will allow Rachel Notley to return to power. And if he can hold off until April, it gives him time to do some backroom deals, some of which I've just mentioned. It gives an opportunity for case counts and hospitalizations around COVID to continue to drop and maybe get more and more distant. It allows for some good economic news, because there has been some good economic news over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That if he can continue to promote that. So there is a path that he can stay as leader. But the challenge is, what about the people outside of the party, right? His popularity is still in the low 20s. And if the party unifies around Kenney, what does that say to the people who aren't members of any political party, who are independents, who are watching this? This may tar and brand the entire UCP. So I think there's multiple audiences here. Audience one is the party itself, and audience two are the rest of Albertans.
Yeah. Brian Jean, how much of a threat is he to Jason Kenney?
So I think there was a reason that Jason Kenney defeated Brian Jean in the leadership race. Jason Kenney is a much more skilled politician. It's no secret that when they were in Ottawa together in the Harper years, that Brian Jean was on the backbenches and Jason Kenney was a senior cabinet minister. But at the same time, Kenney, there were shenanigans that went on in the 2017 leadership race. He set up a kamikaze candidate in the name of Jeff Callaway, who spent the campaign attacking Brian Jean, and at the last moment dropped out of the race and supported Jason Kenney. And we know there was coordination between the Kenney team and the Callaway team. Jeff Callaway also had to deal with tens of thousands of dollars in fines for violating election finance rules. And we're not quite sure where the money came from to support Jeff Callaway. The RCMP is continuing to investigate this. Because there were also voting irregularities involving voting kiosks or PIN numbers. And so there's still a cloud over that race. And I think Kenney would have beaten Jean without any of that, but he wanted an overwhelming victory. So, but this is Fort McMurray. Jean is like Mr. Fort McMurray. You know, he represented the riding federally, he represented the riding provincially. There's a lot of support for him there. He could very well win the nomination and win the by-election. And so he's also got nothing to lose, right? He's had a political career, he's got independent wealth, he's got a young family, but he's clearly very bitter at Jason Kenney. And so I think his goal is to cause as much hurt and as much trouble to Jason Kenney as possible. And he's doing a pretty good job of it right now.
Mm-hmm. One last thing, Duane, as you look into the future and, besides Brian Jean, who else are possible candidates potentially in the future to replace Jason Kenney?
You know, and this is the problem, is that the UCP, it has internal divisions within it. These were magnified because of COVID. But there is a clear tension between sort of the Wild Rose wing and the Progressive Conservative wing, between rural and urban. And the problem is anybody in the current government is seen as being on one side or the other. So a guy like Doug Schweitzer, who has tried at various times to distance himself from Kenney is seen as the progressive conservative urban guy. A guy like Travis Taves or Jason Nixon, they're seen as more wild rosers and representing the rural wing. So these two bodies are both upset with Jason Kenney right now.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing they agree on. They disagree on almost everything else. And so what about someone coming from outside? You know, a Rona Ambrose or a Michelle Rempel Garner. I mean, there's always some possibilities, but I think the bigger issue is, can this party stay united? Because COVID has really shown the splits in it. There's a group that believes that the government has taken too harsh a line on COVID by bringing in a vaccine mandate and bringing in restrictions on restaurants and retail stores. And then there's another contingent that believes that the government hasn't done enough or acted too late. Well, those are two very contradictory messages. So the one thing that they agree on is they're unhappy with Jason Kenney, but they disagree on why they're unhappy.
Yeah.
And so this is the challenge that any future leader, or whether it's Jason Kenney himself, is going to have to deal with.
All right, super. Well, it's going to be an interesting weekend.
Oh, absolutely. Check out the Grey Eagle Casino.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thanks a lot, Duane, for joining us again.
All right, you're welcome, Mario.
All right, that was Duane Bratt, who is political science professor at Mount Royal University in Calgary. I'm Mario Toneguzzi. This is Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.